Well, if you think political persecution is limited to third world countries, think again. Here in the United States, holding the wrong beliefs can get you censored by some of the largest companies in the world. Who's behind this, and what is the government's role? Attorney Michael Ross with ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, is here to explain. Mr. Ross, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
Your organization, ADF, testified before a House subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government on the issue of debanking. Tell us what debanking is.
Yeah, debanking is when these large financial institutions start politicizing their services to cancel or deny service to customers because of that customer's political or religious views. And unfortunately, it's something that we've seen happening with increasing regularity, and we think that the danger is only accelerating.
Give us an example of who is being debanked. What sort of persons or entities?
Absolutely. So, it ranges the full spectrum of conservative and religious groups. One of our clients, Indigenous Advance, is a Memphis, Tennessee-based charity that operates to serve widows, orphans, and at-risk populations in Uganda. And they had been operating since 2015, and it had a Bank of America account, from that point all the way up until April 2023, when right before one of their mission trips, they got a letter from Bank of America saying that we've decided to close your account because you're operating in a business type that we have chosen not to service. They had never given them any notification, any warning, never expressed any concern about any of this before. And the Indigenous Advance was left to scramble to try and shift funds around to make payroll. They had to delay payroll to many of their Ugandan workers who work hand to mouth for a couple of weeks. They had to reduce aid on that ministry trip, and the whole thing was a nightmare. And it left their founder, Steve Happ, wondering, what had he done wrong, and is he going to encounter something like this again?
That is incredible. So no other reason, no other rationale other than you're operating in a business we no longer want to support. That's all they got.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nuts. And he asked repeatedly for an explanation. They sent a follow-up letter on his credit account a month later and said, well, your business type exceeds our bank's risk tolerance. And they would never give him any more explanation. They just read back the two letters, and they closed the account of a local church that Steve Happ is affiliated with, but that it only occasionally donates to the ministry called Servants of Christ. And the telling thing here is that it was not until several months later when an international news media organization, Daily Mail, spoke to Bank of America, that Bank of America tried to reverse engineer some solutions. And, they don't hold any water, but it just goes to show you that, these banks are not dealing in good faith.
Now, are the banks operating alone in this, or are there other entities behind it?
Yeah, we don't know for sure because the entire thing is shrouded in way too much confidentiality and secrecy. And there are too many closed doors in this area, but it's very likely that there's other points of pressure here. A very good indicator we got was the House Judiciary Committee's Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. They released a report a couple of weeks ago on which we testified last week, explaining how federal law enforcement officials were pressuring banks and encouraging banks to profile as potential domestic terrorists Americans with mainstream conservative views, Americans who donate to religious groups, to groups that are labeled extremist by the federal government, or who are associated with a number of quote-unquote hate groups, including Alliance Defending Freedom.
Michael, is there any relationship between this debanking and some of the other reports that we've gotten of banks looking into the financial transactions of their customers and flagging them as conservative?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the banks are denying service to a lot of these individuals, and Indigenous Advance is just one of several. Okay. We have 19 examples up right now. We keep a rolling list on our website, viewpointdiversityscore.org. And it's usually under reputational risk policies saying doing business with you presents a reputational risk to our bank because of your, whatever views or social status or whatever it is that the bank considers, to be a blight on your reputation. Another way that they do this is, saying, well, we're concerned about money laundering or foreign terrorism, and that's an example that is not often trotted out publicly, but when Sam Brownback, the former governor, U.S. Senator, ambassador, had his organization debanked, they said that was a concern of his, because, he was such a nefarious individual. This guy's like an upstanding U.S. citizen. So there's a number of different levers that we're seeing, but when federal law enforcement comes in and puts their thumb on the scale on this, what do you think a bank is going to do? They're definitely going to flag the customer.
What kind of recourse does someone have when they've been notified that their account is being closed?
Yeah, unfortunately, not a lot. There's not a right to appeal. If you think that there's been religious discrimination, there are certain areas, certain states that have protections. Not all of them do. But even then, the banks can come up with any number of vague reasons and try and reverse engineer something to make it very difficult. Ron Lieber, a journalist for the New York Times, wrote about the problem here back in either December or November about how banks just close people's accounts without reason and without notice and warning, and that we need to have more transparency. The banks need to have more dialogue with customers in this area.
We're speaking with ADF attorney Michael Ross about debanking. Michael, are there any strategies that companies and individuals can apply to sort of minimize their risk of being debanked?
Yeah, you certainly can. The report that came out from the House subcommittee identified a lot of these big major financial institutions. Some of the biggest ones are really some of the most problematic in this space. Think Bank of America, J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo. They also have a really bad track record of debanking individuals. And so, I would say, steer away from them. We have a website where we score the country's largest financial institutions on how well they respect free speech and religious liberty through the Viewpoint Diversity Score. And you can see if they have bad customer-facing policies, like reputational risk policies. Another big lever is hate speech or intolerance policies. And so you want to try and avoid banks that have those in their terms of service.
That's good. Let me give that website one more time because that would be helpful for people to check out. ViewpointDiversityScore.org. ViewpointDiversityScore.org. We'll also put a couple of links on our podcast page of articles and PDFs that people may find informative. One of them is an article by Kristen Wagoner titled When Big Banks Discriminate. And the other is a PDF of Alliance Defending Freedom's testimony before this House subcommittee. Michael Ross with Alliance Defending Freedom, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.